fallen asleep in church before? You can be honest, it won't hurt our feelings. Today's story in Acts chapter 20, verses 1 through 12, is kind of a funny story at first glance about a young man who falls asleep in church. What's happening is Paul is gathered around in Troas in this upper room, which should ping our minds. It's kind of this intimate space, like where Jesus had time with his disciples. And they're worshiping and they're eating, and Paul is teaching, and Paul is still teaching, and Paul is still teaching, like around midnight. And we're told this young man named Eutychus falls asleep, and he falls out the window to his death 3 stories below. Paul runs down and says, "Don't be afraid. He's not dead. His life is still in him." And it's unclear whether he was actually dead and Paul raised him back to life, or whether Paul was just saying, no, he's actually not dead, even though it looked like he was dead. I don't think the resurrection is the point of the story. But what is the point of the story? As a modern reader, I'm tended to sympathize with the guy who falls asleep. I mean, Paul should read the audience, read the room. He just keeps talking and talking and talking. But there are years and years to cover in the book of Acts. Many, many stories Luke could have chosen from. Why this one? Why does Luke include this story? And what is it intended to teach the reader? As I kind of made myself dig past that initial layer of humor and maybe some cynicism, it occurred to me maybe Luke is making a point. Maybe he's warning us about what happens when we fall asleep spiritually. Are there places in your spiritual life you have fallen asleep, where you have let things carry on and you've just become maybe lazy, maybe tired, and maybe you've just drifted away from prayer, from reading scripture, from compassion and service, from the practice of listening for the voice of God? Are there places you've fallen asleep? And I think what Luke is using this story to illustrate is that it's a pretty serious thing to fall asleep spiritually. For Eutychus, who fell asleep quite literally, he fell to a serious injury, maybe even his own death. And Paul was there to go revive him, to restore him, to bring him back. I wonder if you and I fall asleep, and there are consequences for our sleep, who will rouse us? Who will awaken us and bring us back into the light? Do you have people around you who would wake you up if you had fallen asleep spiritually? Let this video be that for you today. Take a moment to examine, ask the Lord, are there places in which I have fallen asleep? Things you've called me to or asked of me where I've just drifted away and ignored it. I think Luke is offering us this slightly funny story, although treacherous. Luke's offering it to us as a warning so that we don't make the same mistake. Because when we fall asleep, there are consequences. Not like consequences like you fell asleep spiritually, therefore God does this to you, but Eutychus just falls out the window, natural consequences. And there are natural consequences that await us if we allow ourselves to drift off to sleep, to what God is doing in us and in the world. So today, stay awake and alert and check to see if you have been sleeping on the job.